Russell was still alive through the whole writing process. He died about a week after I finished the script. So we were able to go back and forth with the script.
They almost made a movie so racist, it would have caused theater riots. The first version of Taxi Driver was that bad. The writer was living in his car, keeping a loaded gun by his side while typing. The actor was so desperate to become a killer that he lost 30 pounds and got a real taxi license. The child actress was only 12 but played a prostitute. And the violence was so graphic, they had to make the blood look darker just to avoid an X rating. This is the truth Hollywood didn't want you to know about one of the most famous movies ever made. In the spring of 1972, Paul Schrader was in a bad place. His marriage had ended, he lost his job, and he was living in his car. He couldn't sleep, and his nights were spent wandering New York and watching adult movies. Then, on April 8th, doctors told him he had a bleeding ulcer. That moment changed everything. After getting out of the hospital 10 days later, he stayed at his ex-girlfriend's apartment. He barely spoke to anyone. In that strange, lonely state, he started writing. In just 10 days, he finished the script for Taxi Driver. 60 pages came out in a burst, and by May 2nd, it was done. After getting out of the hospital 10 days later, he stayed at his ex-girlfriend's apartment. He barely spoke to anyone. In that strange, lonely state, he started writing. In just 10 days, he finished the script for Taxi Driver. 60 pages came out in a burst, and by May 2nd, it was done. What he wrote came straight from how he felt. The pain, the isolation, the confusion. It all ended up on the page. His mind was in a dark place, and the character of Travis Bickl was born from it. To keep himself focused, Schrader kept a loaded gun in his desk drawer while he wrote. A .38 revolver. He didn't plan to use it, but he said it helped him concentrate. The presence of death was always there, pushing him to write, keeping him alert. It was a strange and dangerous method, but it worked. And the gun stayed there, loaded, through the entire writing process. As days passed, Schrader began to see how much he had in common with the man he was writing about. Like Travis, he was completely alone. He spent nights just driving through the city, doing nothing. He had no real connections, no one to talk to. He went to the same kind of movie theaters Travis did. He became fascinated with guns. It wasn't just a story anymore. Schrader was slipping into the same mindset as his character. He later admitted that he was in a very bad place, and that writing the script may have saved him. The image of the taxi came to him during his hospital stay. One night, he realized he hadn't talked to anyone in weeks. Suddenly, he pictured a taxi, this metal box floating through the city, alone. The driver is surrounded by people but speaks to no one. That became Travis Bickl, a man behind the wheel, cut off from the world, always moving, never connecting. The taxi became a symbol of isolation. It wasn't just a job for Travis, it was a prison on wheels. While writing, Schrader came across something that deeply influenced him, a diary written by Arthur Bremer. Bremer was the man who tried to kill presidential candidate George Wallace. His diary was full of strange, lonely thoughts. He wasn't driven by politics. He just wanted to be noticed. That raw voice helped Schrader shape Travis's monologues. Bremer's words felt real. They gave Travis an edge that made him feel uncomfortably human. This connection to a real-life figure made the film feel even darker. When Martin Scorsese took on the film, he wanted to make it feel like a nightmare. A dream where nothing is quite right. The streets glistened with rain. Steam rose from manholes, like something evil was waiting underneath. The camera moved slowly, like it was floating. It felt surreal, almost drugged. Scorsese told his cinematographer to make the lights harsh in some places and dim in others. Red lights were used to show danger and madness. In the scenes at the brothel, everything was soaked in red, like blood. Audiences felt uncomfortable watching it, which is exactly what Scorsese wanted. There was something else beneath the surface of Taxi Driver. Something religious. Scorsese grew up Catholic, and Schroeder was raised in a strict Calvinist home. That influence showed in Travis's journey. He saw his mission as a form of cleansing. When he planned to rescue the young girl, Iris, he spoke like a man who had found his purpose. "There never has been a choice for me," he said. He talked like a prophet, like a man on a holy path. But instead of redemption through kindness, he found it through blood. The violence in the film wasn't just for shock. It was a twisted kind of sacrifice. It asked a dark question. What happens when a man tries to be a savior without understanding what salvation really means? Before Taxi Driver became one of the most famous films of the 1970s, its main role almost went to someone else entirely. Dustin Hoffman was approached to play Travis Bickl, the disturbed loner at the center of the story. But during a meeting with director Martin Scorsese, Hoffman felt unsure. At the time, Scorsese wasn't well known, and he spoke so quickly and passionately that Hoffman thought he was unhinged. There was no finished script, just wild energy and a strange pitch. Hoffman turned the role down, later admitting it was one of the biggest mistakes of his career. He realized too late how special the role was and how perfectly it would have fit him. Scorsese had seen something in Hoffman, something that could mix the naivety of The Graduate with the grit of Midnight Cowboy. But it wasn't meant to be. Hoffman wasn't the only major actor considered. Al Pacino was also in the running. He was fresh off his success in The Godfather, and many wondered what he would have brought to the role. Jeff Bridges was another serious contender, riding high from his performance in The Last Picture Show. The producers explored several options, trying to find someone who could truly embody a man on the edge, quiet on the outside, but full of chaos underneath. In the end, Scorsese chose someone he'd already worked with, Robert De Niro. They had made Mean Streets together a few years earlier, and Scorsese knew De Niro could handle the darkness of the character. That decision would launch one of the greatest director-actor collaborations in film history. At that point, De Niro wasn't yet a household name. He'd been raised in New York by artist parents. His father was a painter and sculptor. His mother a poet and painter too. De Niro's world was full of creativity, but his path wasn't set in stone. He showed early promise with roles in Bang the Drum Slowly and Mean Streets, where critics praised his raw intensity. Roger Ebert called his performance in Mean Streets filled with urgency and desperation. Still, most audiences didn't know who he was when he signed on for Taxi Driver. But he took the role seriously. De Niro had studied under legendary acting teacher Stella Adler, and he approached Travis Bickl like a psychological puzzle, digging deep into the character's loneliness and anger. That preparation helped him create a figure who would haunt audiences for decades. De Niro's connection to acting went back further than most knew. At just 10 years old, he played the Cowardly Lion in a school production of The Wizard of Oz. For a shy boy, nicknamed Bobby Milk because of his pale skin, that moment on stage was life-changing. He felt free, like he could be someone else without judgment. By age 16, he dropped out of high school to chase his dream full-time. His mother supported him, even giving him the money she had saved for college. De Niro put it all toward acting school and never looked back. His time growing up in Little Italy also shaped him. He ran with a local street gang, not a dangerous one, but enough to give him a real feel for the streets. The nickname Bobby Milk stuck because of how pale and quiet he was. But those early years gave him an understanding of how people behave in rough environments. That insight became useful when playing characters like Travis Bickl, who feel isolated and on the fringe of society. De Niro once said, "Acting let him do things he'd never dare to do in real life." For him, it was a safe way to explore dangerous emotions. While De Niro was diving deep into the character of Travis, another bold casting decision was happening. Jodie Foster, just 12 years old at the time, was cast as Iris, a child prostitute. The role was so controversial that child welfare authorities stepped in. Foster had to sit through a 4-hour psychiatric evaluation to make sure she could handle the emotional weight of the role. She passed easily. The doctor who assessed her even noted her extremely high IQ and emotional maturity. Still, protests erupted. For 17 days, child advocacy groups picketed the film's set in New York, demanding the role be recast. To address concerns, the filmmakers used Jodie's 20-year-old sister, Connie, as a body double for the more sensitive scenes. Connie wore a wig, matched Jodie's hairstyle, and went through hours of makeup to look just like her. Even with these precautions, the film faced bans in 17 countries, some of which didn't allow it to be shown until years later. Jodie wasn't an ordinary 12-year-old. She had grown up in a unique environment. She attended a French school in Los Angeles from the age of 3 and spoke fluent French by 7. By 12, she could speak 5 languages. At the same time, she had already acted in over 50 commercials and 24 TV shows. She even helped translate for the cast and crew at the Cannes Film Festival the year Taxi Driver premiered. Her intelligence and poise made her stand out, not just as a child star, but as someone far beyond her years. Behind Jodie's rise was her mother, Evelyn Brandy Foster. She had worked as a publicist in Hollywood and knew how to get her daughter noticed. From the time Jodie was a toddler, Brandy had her attending events, auditions, and parties, anything to build connections. It paid off. Jodie landed her first commercial at age 3 and got her first acting roles soon after. She had already worked with Scorsese on Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, and that past experience helped her secure the part in Taxi Driver. Brandy also fought for Jodie to be properly compensated, negotiating a $500,000 salary, the highest ever for a child actor at that time. Making Taxi Driver in the summer of 1975 was a battle from start to finish. The budget was just $1.9 million, tiny even back then. Today, that would be around $10 million, which still wouldn't stretch far in the film world. Everyone had to make sacrifices to get it done. Robert De Niro had just won an Oscar for The Godfather Part 2, but he agreed to do Taxi Driver for only $35,000. The rest of the cast also took pay cuts. Every dollar counted. The crew had to be creative with everything. When they filmed the famous "You Talkin' to Me" scene, it was in a real New York apartment. The space was so tight, they had to pull out a radiator just to fit the camera in. Backing the movie wasn't an easy decision either. The script was dark, violent, and disturbing. Columbia Pictures almost passed on it. One executive even asked, "Who's going to watch a movie about a psychotic taxi driver?" But producers Michael and Julia Phillips believed in the project. They had just had a big hit with The Sting, and they used that success to push Taxi Driver through. In the end, Columbia gave the green light, barely. The budget started at $1.3 million and only later grew to $1.9 million. Even then, it was still far less than what most movies got. When the studio finally saw the first cut, they were worried. The violence was extreme, and Travis Bickle's story was so intense that they feared it would get an X rating. That would have killed the film's chances in theaters. Only after cutting a few scenes did the film manage to get an R rating. As if that wasn't enough, filming in New York at the time was dangerous. The city was broke, crime was everywhere, and neighborhoods like Times Square and the Bronx were rough. But Scorsese wanted the real thing. He didn't want fake sets. He wanted the dirt, the chaos, the danger, all of it. So that's where they shot. On the streets, in the middle of it all. There was trash piling up because of a sanitation strike. One crew member was even mugged at gunpoint while looking for locations. Still, Scorsese wouldn't back down. He wanted to capture the truth of the city, no matter the risk. Most of the filming happened at night, partly because it fit the story, but also because the budget didn't allow for fancy lighting. The crew had to work with whatever lights were already there. It gave the movie a raw, gritty look, almost like a documentary. Those nights were tough. On one shoot, the temperature hit 98 degrees and the humidity was unbearable. Still, the crew kept going, working until sunrise. In some scenes, you can even spot real prostitutes walking by, completely unaware they were in a movie. That's how real it all was. They were filming in the middle of actual street life. Drug deals, fights, everything. Without even meaning to, the movie ended up capturing a New York that doesn't exist anymore. Times Square back then was full of adult theaters and grindhouse cinemas. Now it's packed with tourists and neon lights. Places in the movie, like the Belmore Cafeteria or the adult theater where Travis takes Betsy, are long gone, replaced by condos and stores. Even the building where the final shootout happens was torn down in 2011. A modern apartment complex stands there now. Watching Taxi Driver today is like looking into a time machine. It's not just a movie, it's a glimpse of a vanished city, gritty, broken, and unforgettable. In 1975, Robert De Niro had just won an Oscar for The Godfather Part 2. He could have taken a break or picked an easy role, but instead, he signed up to drive a yellow taxi through the streets of New York. For an entire month, he worked 12-hour shifts, like a real cab driver. He wanted to understand what it felt like to live in that world, tired, ignored, and surrounded by the city's darker side. Only once did someone recognize him. A young, struggling actor stepped into his cab, stared at him, and said, "Wait a minute, you just won an Oscar. My God, is it that hard to get work?" De Niro didn't do it for fame. He did it to become Travis Bickl. Driving wasn't the only change he made. He lost 30 pounds, making his already thin body look even sharper. The idea was to show how tightly wounded Travis was, how his mind was slipping. Even years later, people remembered that dedication. The Taxi and Limousine Commission eventually posted his actual license photo online. He was just 32 years old. The license expired in May 1976, shortly after Taxi Driver hit theaters. One of the most famous scenes in the film almost didn't happen. The line, "You talking to me?" wasn't even in the script. All the script said was that Travis looked in the mirror. But De Niro started talking to himself during filming, inventing the moment on the spot. The crew was running behind schedule, and producers were banging on the door, begging Scorsese to move on. But Scorsese sat right by De Niro's feet, telling him to keep going. What came out of that moment was pure electricity. Travis wasn't just staring at himself, he was seeing an enemy in the mirror. And by confusing the audience, the scene showed how much Travis was fighting his own mind. That same intensity shows up again with the mohawk. Travis doesn't just change his look, he turns himself into a soldier. The idea came from a real photo, shown to Scorsese and De Niro by a Vietnam veteran. Some soldiers would shave their heads into mohawks before going into battle. It was a way to psych themselves up. De Niro wanted that same look, but he had a problem. He was about to shoot another movie and couldn't actually shave his head. So legendary makeup artist Dick Smith created a fake mohawk using latex and prosthetic hair. It looked real, but came with a cost. De Niro had to move carefully to keep the piece in place. That stiffness ended up helping the character. Travis looked like a man who was ready to snap. De Niro's physical transformation didn't stop there. Along with driving cabs and losing weight, he trained hard with guns. He wanted to handle them like someone who had done it before. At the same time, he was filming a completely different movie in Italy. He would shoot scenes in Rome, then fly to New York to drive taxis, then fly back again. It was exhausting, but he was already thinking ahead. A few years later, for Raging Bull, he would box for months, enter real matches, then gain 60 pounds to play the older version of Jake LaMotta. He kept pushing further. For Cape Fear, he even paid a dentist to file down his teeth to look more threatening. Then he paid even more to fix them afterward. To get inside Travis Bickle's head, De Niro didn't just act, he studied. He visited U.S. Army bases in Italy and spoke with soldiers who had fought in Vietnam. He recorded their voices, listened to how they talked, and paid close attention to their body language. He wanted to show what trauma looked like, not just from war, but from what came after. Taxi Driver didn't show battles. It showed what happened to a man who came back home and didn't know how to live anymore. Travis felt forgotten, like many real veterans did. Even Oliver Stone, who fought in Vietnam and later became a famous director, said he believed the character was partly based on him. He used to wear the same army coat while driving a cab around New York. The music behind all this madness came from Bernard Herrmann. He was a legend already, known for scoring Psycho, but Taxi Driver would be his final work. On December 23, 1975, he finished recording the score. Just hours later, on Christmas Eve, he died of a heart attack in his hotel room. Scorsese added a message in the credits to honor him. It was his last piece of music, and one of his best. Herrmann's score was full of contrast. Smooth saxophone sounds played over rainy streets, making the city seem almost romantic. But then came the harsh percussion and dissonant horns, jarring and angry. It was like Travis's mind, calm one minute, boiling the next. During the final shootout, there was no music at all. But afterward, the brass exploded in a twisted, violent burst. It sounded like something unhinged had finally been let loose. At first, Herrmann didn't want to take the job. He was known for being difficult and refused to work on projects unless he had full control. Years earlier, that same attitude had ended his partnership with Alfred Hitchcock. But when Scorsese showed him a rough cut of Taxi Driver, Herrmann changed his mind. He saw right away that this film had something special. His instincts were right. The score was later nominated for an Oscar and won a BAFTA. After Herrmann's death, Scorsese made changes to the film to better showcase his final work. One key moment came at the end. Travis drops off Betsy and watches her disappear in his rearview mirror. The familiar saxophone theme plays, but then it suddenly shifts. A strange, high-pitched sound cuts in. It's a vibraphone played backward, a creepy sting Herrmann suggested just before he died. That haunting sound became the last thing audiences heard. Scorsese said it was meant to show that Travis wasn't cured. He might look calm, but something inside him was still ticking, waiting to go off again. When Paul Schrader first wrote the script for Taxi Driver, it had a very different and far more dangerous tone. In his original version, all the pimps in the story were meant to be black. That included Sport, the character later played by Harvey Keitel. Schroeder believed this made sense for 1970s New York, where many pimps were black men. But this choice would have completely changed the way audiences saw the film. Travis Bickle's violent rampage at the end would have looked less like a rescue and more like a racially motivated massacre. Even Schroeder later admitted that it would have turned the ending into what he called a racist slaughter. Once the idea of casting black actors for those roles was reconsidered, Schroeder was asked to rewrite with white pimps instead. He actually went around uptown New York looking for examples, asking strangers if they'd heard of a white guy who runs girls. Most people just looked at him like he was crazy. But this search showed just how tied the original idea was to race. The change in casting wasn't just about performance, it was about preventing violence. One studio executive even warned, "We're going to have an incident in a theater if you do this." That wasn't just fear-mongering. Just a few years later, a different film about gangs, The Warriors, led to real-world fights and deaths. Studio heads didn't want to take that chance with Taxi Driver. Even though the pimps were eventually cast as white, Taxi Driver didn't fully shake off its racial undertones. Early in the film, Travis shoots a black man who's robbing a convenience store. It's his first kill. The moment is quick, but it says a lot. Travis already has a gun on him. He's not acting in pure self-defense. He's clearly been looking for someone to take down. The store owner's reaction makes things worse. Instead of calling the police, he waves it off and even hits the dead man's body with a crowbar. No one questions Travis. That quiet approval makes the scene even more disturbing. This wasn't the only way Taxi Driver showed hints of racism. Scorsese borrowed heavily from an older Western film called The Searchers, where John Wayne plays a man obsessed with saving his niece from Native Americans. But the character's real goal is to kill her because he believes she's been contaminated. Travis, like that character, sees the world as dirty and dangerous, and he thinks only he can fix it. He even dresses like a cowboy, with boots and revolvers, as if he's some kind of modern gunslinger. But his hero complex is soaked in hate, not justice. You can also hear it in Travis's famous line about wanting the real rain to come and wash the scum off the streets. He never says anything directly about race, but viewers at the time didn't need him to. The film lingers on black pedestrians as Travis watches from his cab. In one scene, a passenger, played by Scorsese himself, rants about his wife sleeping with a black man. He describes how he wants to kill her. Some critics think this character represents Travis's inner thoughts, saying out loud what Travis can't. Not long after, Travis buys the same kind of gun that the passenger mentioned. From that point forward, the film seems to focus more and more on black faces, always from Travis's hostile point of view. It's like the camera itself starts to share his anger. The violence at the end of the film nearly got it banned. When Scorsese first finished it, the MPAA said they'd slap it with an X rating because of how brutal it was. Columbia Pictures told him to cut the scene or change it. Scorsese didn't want to cut anything, so he found a clever workaround. He desaturated the color in the final shootout, making the blood look darker and less red. It was a trick he borrowed from an old adaptation of Moby Dick. The effect made the violence seem a little less shocking, just enough to avoid the dreaded rating. But that fix came at a price. The original film reels with full-color blood were chemically altered and then discarded. That version is gone forever. Even with all this controversy, Taxi Driver left a deep mark. One person it affected in the worst possible way was John Hinckley Jr. After watching the movie over and over, he became obsessed with Jodie Foster, who played the young prostitute Iris. He started following her, even showing up at her college. When she didn't respond to his creepy messages and calls, he decided to act like Travis Bickl. In the movie, Travis tries to kill a politician. Hinckley thought that doing the same thing would impress Foster. In 1981, he shot President Ronald Reagan and 3 others. Reagan survived, but his press secretary was permanently disabled. Still, the film was recognized as a work of art. It won the top prize at the Cannes Film Festival, even though some people booed it. The jury president, Tennessee Williams, hated how violent it was. Scorsese didn't even show up to accept the award. At the Oscars, Taxi Driver was nominated for 4 major awards, including Best Picture, Best Actor, and Best Supporting Actress, but didn't win any. The winner that year was Rocky, a much more hopeful story. Some say Taxi Driver was too raw, too real, and too disturbing for the Academy to reward. Years later, the Library of Congress selected it for preservation, calling it culturally and historically important. That honor helped cement its legacy as a turning point in American film. It also made sure future audiences could see it as Scorsese intended, unfiltered and untouched. And the idea behind Taxi Driver still lives on. In South Korea, a popular TV series called Taxi Driver reimagines the concept. This time, the taxi driver works for a secret group that gets revenge for people failed by the justice system. The cases in the show are based on real crimes, some horrifying, like child abuse or modern-day slavery. Just like Scorsese's film, the series raises questions about justice, revenge, and what happens when people feel powerless. It proves that even after all these years, the story of an angry man behind the wheel still strikes a chord around the world.